My mother-in-law stood up at our wedding reception and announced, "She's not worthy of my son, this marriage is a mistake." Then threw her wine in my face in front of 200 guests. I simply smiled and said nothing. 3 weeks later, she called me sobbing after discovering what her perfect son had been hiding for 7 years. I met James during our final year of college when we prepared for a corporate internship project. He was handsome, confident, and came from a wealthy family, while I was just an ordinary girl struggling to pay tuition with scholarships. Our meeting felt like a fairy tale. He actively sought collaboration with my department, and gradually, we went from colleagues to lovers. Back then, I was completely immersed in our relationship, believing I had finally found my soulmate. James was incredibly attentive, always saying my kindness and sincerity were what he admired most. "Sarah, I've never met a girl as genuine as you," he would often compliment me. "You know, other girls only approach me for my family's money and status." After 2 years of dating, James proposed on my 27th birthday. He had arranged a rooftop garden filled with twinkling lights, and when he got down on one knee, I couldn't hold back my tears. At that moment, I naively believed this was the beginning of a perfect love story. But I quickly sensed the coldness and hostility from James's mother, Patricia. During my first formal visit to meet my future mother-in-law, she barely looked me in the eye, spending the entire time examining my clothes, speech, and mannerisms like a judge evaluating a criminal. "What does your family do?" was the first thing she asked me. When she learned my father was just a small-town mailman and my mother a kindergarten teacher, the subtle contempt at the corner of her lips made my heart sink. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she exchanged a meaningful glance with James, who suddenly became interested in his phone. "James has always been adventurous in his choices," she said with a tight smile. "But I suppose that's part of youth, exploring different backgrounds before settling down properly." I felt my cheeks burn but forced myself to remain composed. James squeezed my hand under the table, but didn't contradict his mother. That should have been my first warning sign. As our wedding preparations progressed, Patricia's interference became increasingly unbearable. She rejected every suggestion I made, from the venue to the flowers, even my choice of wedding dress. "Darling, this silhouette simply won't work with your figure," she said, eyeing me up and down at the bridal boutique. "Perhaps something more concealing would be appropriate." James always played the mediator, never truly standing up for me. "Mom just wants the best for us," he would say. "She has excellent taste and connections. It's easier if we just let her handle things." By the time our wedding day arrived, I barely recognized the celebration as mine. Patricia had transformed it into a social networking event for her country club friends, with 75% of the guests being people I had never met. The elegant ballroom of the Grand Plaza Hotel was decorated in colors I hadn't chosen, with centerpieces I had specifically said I didn't want. Yet I remained hopeful. Once we were married, things would change. James would prioritize our relationship. We would build our own life together. The ceremony itself was beautiful despite everything. When James looked into my eyes and said "I do," I felt that perhaps everything had been worth it. My parents, simple and honest people, beamed with pride from the front row, looking slightly out of place among the sea of designer outfits and surgical enhancements. It was during the reception that everything fell apart. James had gone to greet some business associates of his father's, leaving me alone at the head table. Patricia, who had been drinking steadily since the ceremony, approached with a glass of red wine in hand. "You know he's only marrying you because of that ridiculous project you two worked on," she slurred just loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "He feels responsible for you. It's pity, not love." I felt my stomach tighten but maintained my composure. "I think you've had enough to drink, Patricia." That's when she snapped. She stood up, glass in hand, and clinked it loudly with a spoon. The room gradually fell silent, all 200 guests turning to look at our table. "I'd like to make an announcement," she declared, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "This marriage is a mistake. She's not worthy of my son." The silence was deafening. I could see my parents' horrified expressions, the shocked faces of guests, and worst of all James, frozen across the room, making no move to intervene. Then, as if the verbal assault wasn't enough, Patricia threw her glass of wine directly in my face. The cold liquid dripped down my white gown, staining it crimson like blood. Instead of crying or screaming as she clearly expected, I simply smiled. Years of dealing with her had taught me one thing: showing pain only gave her more power. I calmly took a napkin from the table, wiped my face, and stood up. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate our special day," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "Please enjoy the rest of the evening." I walked out of the ballroom with as much dignity as I could muster, ignoring the whispers and stares. James followed me 5 minutes later, apologizing profusely, claiming his mother had mental health issues and had been under stress. Somehow, we made it through the rest of our wedding day. James promised things would be different once we returned from our honeymoon. That his mother would come around eventually. That he would set proper boundaries. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But 3 weeks after the wedding, the truth I had been refusing to see came crashing down around me. And surprisingly, it was Patricia who uncovered it first. My phone rang at 3:47 a.m. Patricia's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it. But something told me to answer. "Sarah," she sobbed, her voice almost unrecognizable. I was wrong. I was so wrong about everything. I sat up in bed, immediately alert despite the early hour. James stirred beside me but didn't wake up. "What's going on, Patricia?" I asked, keeping my voice low as I slipped out of the bedroom. "Can you meet me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Please, I need to see you in person." Without James, part of me wanted to refuse. After what she'd done at the wedding, I had every right to hang up. But her unusual vulnerability sparked my curiosity. I agreed to meet her at a 24-hour diner halfway between our homes. When I arrived at 4:30 a.m., I almost didn't recognize the woman sitting in the corner booth. Patricia's perfect hair was disheveled, her eyes puffy and red, without a trace of her usual immaculate makeup. The designer clothes were replaced by what appeared to be pajamas hastily covered with a trench coat. "Thank you for coming," she whispered as I slid into the seat across from her. She placed a folder on the table and pushed it toward me with trembling hands. "I found this in James's home office. The one he always keeps locked." She couldn't meet my eyes. I've always had a spare key, but I respected his privacy, until yesterday. I opened the folder and felt my world collapse around me. Inside were documents, photos, and printouts of email exchanges. Each page revealed a new layer of deception that had been carefully hidden from both of us. The first document was a copy of a birth certificate for a 5-year-old girl named Emma. Father, James Wilson. Mother, Rebecca Taylor. "He has a child," I whispered, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. Patricia nodded, tears streaming down her face. "And that's not all. The next document was a lease agreement for an apartment across town, an apartment James had been paying for since before we even met. The photos showed James with a beautiful woman and the little girl at various playgrounds and birthday parties. They looked like a perfect, happy family. But the most devastating discovery was a printout of James's secret bank statements. For the past 7 years, he had been systematically transferring money from his family's accounts, including his mother's personal trust, into offshore accounts under a different name. "He's stolen over $3.7 million, Patricia said, her voice hollow. "From our family foundation, from my retirement fund, even from his father's medical trust." She reached for her coffee with shaking hands. "All while I was busy criticizing you, he was living a double life," I finished for her. I felt strangely calm as the pieces fell into place. James's frequent business trips, the mysterious phone calls he'd take in another room, how he always seemed to have perfectly reasonable explanations for everything. "Does he know you found this?" I asked. Patricia shook her head. "I put everything back exactly as I found it. He has no idea." We sat in silence for several minutes, two women connected by the same betrayal, processing the shattered illusions of the man we both thought we knew. "I've been horrible to you," Patricia finally said. "I convinced myself you were after his money, that you weren't good enough for him. But all this time, he was the one who wasn't good enough," I said quietly. I took out my phone and began taking photos of every document in the folder. When Patricia gave me a questioning look, I explained evidence. "We're both going to need it." By the time the sun rose, we had formed an unlikely alliance and created a plan. Patricia would contact the family attorney about the financial fraud, while I would return home to confront James, but not before we both secured our assets. "I misjudged you completely," Patricia said as we stood in the parking lot. "Your background, your family. I was so blinded by status and appearances." "We both were deceived," I replied. "But not anymore." When I returned home, James was still sleeping peacefully, unaware that his carefully constructed house of cards was about to collapse. I quietly packed an overnight bag and transferred my modest savings to an account he couldn't access. Then I gently shook him awake. "Morning, beautiful," he mumbled, reaching for me. "Where'd you go so early?" "I had breakfast with your mother," I said calmly, watching his face. His eyes immediately widened, all traces of sleepiness vanishing. "My mother? Why would you?" "We had a lot to talk about," I interrupted. "About Emma." And Rebecca. And the missing money. The color drained from his face. For a moment, he seemed frozen, like a deer in headlights. Then, in an instant, his expression changed. The charming mask slipped away, revealing something cold and calculating I had never seen before. "Whatever she told you is a lie," he said, his voice hardening as he sat up. "She's always been jealous of my independence, always trying to control me." "Really? So these are lies too?" I held up my phone, showing him the photos of the documents. He lunged for my phone, but I was quicker, stepping back out of his reach. "You had no right to go through my private things," he shouted, his handsome face contorted with rage. "Just like you had no right to marry me while having another family? Or steal millions from your own mother?" His strategy shifted instantly. The anger melted away, replaced by the charming, apologetic James, the first thought I knew. "Sarah, baby, it's complicated," he said, his voice softening. "Rebecca and I were over years ago. I only stay involved because of Emma. And the money, it was my inheritance anyway. I just accessed it early." I almost laughed at the absurdity of his explanation. "The lease renewal for Rebecca's apartment is dated last month, James. And those bank transfers were happening weekly, including one 3 days after our wedding." For 2 hours, I listened to his excuses, his promises, his threats, and finally his pleas. He cycled through every manipulation tactic, but I remained unmoved. The nice, accommodating Sarah who would have done anything to please him was gone, replaced by a woman who finally saw the truth. "I'm leaving," I said eventually, picking up my bag. "Your mother's lawyers will be contacting you about the missing funds. I suggest you get your own attorney." His face turned ugly again. "You'll get nothing from me." "The prenup?" "Actually, the prenup has a morality clause," I interrupted, enjoying the shock on his face. "Your mother insisted on it, remember? Infidelity invalidates the entire agreement." As I walked out the door, he called after me, "You'll regret this. You're nothing without me." I turned back one last time, looking at the stranger I had married. "No, James. For the first time since I met you, I'm finally becoming myself again." The next 2 months were a whirlwind of legal meetings, painful revelations, and surprising personal growth. Patricia, surprisingly, became my strongest ally. We met with attorneys together, shared information, and gradually formed a bond forged in our shared betrayal. James's deception ran even deeper than we initially discovered. The family attorneys uncovered 5 separate bank accounts, 3 offshore investments, and a vacation property in the Cayman Islands, all purchased with stolen funds. His financial fraud wasn't limited to family money either. He had misappropriated client investments from his position at his father's firm. "I just don't understand how I didn't see it," Patricia confessed during one of our strategy meetings. "I was so focused on protecting the family from outsiders that I never watched for threats from within." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "He fooled us both. He was an expert manipulator." What surprised me most was discovering my own resilience. Each day, I grew stronger, more confident in my decisions. I moved into a modest apartment, found a job at a marketing firm that valued my skills, and began rebuilding my life piece by piece. James, meanwhile, was unraveling fast. When confronted with the evidence by the family attorneys, he initially tried to deny everything. When that failed, he blamed his actions on a gambling addiction, a lie, then on Rebecca blackmailing him, another lie, and finally on feeling suffocated by family expectations. The family's legal team was pursuing criminal charges, while Patricia had already removed him from the family trust and company positions. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling, revealing the selfish, entitled man who had hidden behind charm and good looks. 6 weeks after our separation, James showed up unannounced at my apartment building. "Sarah, please," he called through the intercom. "Just 5 minutes. I've changed." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him in the building's public lobby, not out of any remaining affection, but to finally close this chapter of my life. He looked terrible. The designer clothes were replaced with wrinkled khakis and an untucked shirt. His previously perfect hair was disheveled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "You've ruined my life," were his first words to me. I almost laughed. "I believe you did that yourself, James. If you hadn't gone snooping. Your mother found the evidence, not me," I reminded him. "And only because you got careless." He ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "The firm is pressing charges. Mom has cut me off completely. Rebecca is demanding full custody of Emma." His voice cracked. "Everything is falling apart." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the years of lies, the wedding day humiliation, how he had stood frozen while his mother threw wine in my face. "What did you expect, James? That you could lie to everyone forever?" I need your help, he said, his voice dropping to the charming, intimate tone I once found irresistible. If you tell the prosecutors you knew about the accounts, that we planned this together, you want me to confess to crimes I didn't commit? I was incredulous. Just say you knew about some of it, he pressed, moving closer. They'd give us both lighter sentences. We could start over afterward, somewhere new. The audacity was breathtaking. Even now, facing the consequences of his actions, he was still trying to manipulate others to save himself. Goodbye, James, I said, standing up. Don't contact me again. His face hardened. You ungrateful bitch. I gave you everything. Without me, you'd still be nothing, just some scholarship charity case with no connections, no future. As his true colors emerged one final time, I felt a peculiar sense of peace wash over me. This man had never loved me. He had only loved the reflection of himself he saw in my admiration. Security, I called to the lobby guard who had been watching our interaction closely. This man is leaving now. As James was escorted out, shouting threats and obscenities, my phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. The DA is filing charges tomorrow. It's finally over. 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. So much had changed since that fateful wedding day. James had eventually pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. He was currently serving a 7-year sentence, with restitution payments that would follow him long after his release. The divorce was finalized in record time, with the morality clause indeed invalidating the harsh prenup he had insisted upon. My career had flourished unexpectedly. After the story broke in financial circles, a prominent women's business magazine had asked to interview me about the experience. The article, From Deception to Direction, How One Woman Rebuilt After Betrayal, had gone viral, leading to speaking opportunities and eventually a position as a consultant for financial institutions on fraud prevention. As for Patricia, our unlikely friendship had deepened over time. After decades of defining herself through social status and appearances, she was discovering new purpose by establishing a foundation for victims of financial abuse. We met monthly for lunch, where she often brought up potential suitors she had vetted thoroughly, a habit I tolerated with amusement but politely declined. My doorbell rang, interrupting my reflection. It was my parents, arriving for our weekly dinner tradition. The place looks even nicer than last time, Mom said, hugging me tightly. Dad placed a bottle of wine on the counter. Nothing expensive, just a favorite from our local vineyard back home. Proud of you, kiddo. Always have been. As we sat down to eat, I looked at their honest, loving faces and felt a surge of gratitude. These were the people who had taught me my true worth, who had given me the foundation to rebuild when everything collapsed. Everything okay? Mom asked, noticing my momentary distraction. I smiled, thinking of the journey from that wine-soaked wedding dress to this peaceful new life. Never better, I replied truthfully. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Later that night, after my parents had left, I received a text from Patricia. Rebecca contacted me. Emma is asking questions about her grandfather. Would you be comfortable if I arranged a meeting? The little girl shouldn't suffer for her father's mistakes. I stared at the message for a long time, contemplating the complex web of relationships James had created and then damaged. Finally, I typed, I think that would be healing for everyone. Count me in. Life rarely gives us perfect endings or complete justice. Sometimes, the most powerful form of moving forward isn't about getting everything you're owed, but about reclaiming your power to choose your own path. The woman who had once smiled silently while wine dripped down her wedding dress was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and finally, truly, free. The meeting with Emma was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at Patricia's home. I arrived early, my stomach in knots despite my outward composure. This wasn't about James anymore. This was about an innocent child caught in the web of adult deceptions. Patricia welcomed me with a warm hug. Thank you for doing this, she whispered. Her home had changed significantly over the past year and a half. The cold, museum-like perfection had been replaced with comfortable furniture and actual family photos, including, to my surprise, one of me and her from the foundation's first fundraising event. They're on their way, Patricia said, straightening a vase of fresh flowers for the third time. Rebecca called from the car. I touched her arm gently. It's going to be fine. We're doing the right thing. The doorbell rang, and we both froze momentarily before Patricia moved to answer it. Standing on the porch was a slender woman with auburn hair holding the hand of a little girl who was unmistakably James's daughter. The same expressive eyes, the same dimple when she offered a hesitant smile. Rebecca, Emma, please come in, Patricia said with remarkable steadiness. Thank you for coming. Rebecca stepped inside, her posture guarded but determined. "Thank you for inviting us. It's time Emma knew her family." The little girl looked up at me curiously. "Are you my daddy's friend too?" My heart constricted. How do you explain something so complicated to a child? I knelt down to her level. "I knew your dad, yes. But today I'm here to meet you, because you're very important to your grandmother Patricia." Emma seemed to accept this explanation, her attention already captured by the plate of cookies Patricia had prepared. Over the next hour, the adults engaged in careful, measured conversation while Emma explored Patricia's garden. Rebecca, I learned, had met James in college before I knew him. They had dated seriously until she became pregnant, at which point James convinced her to keep their relationship and child a secret, promising eventual marriage once he secured his position in the family business. He told me his parents were extremely traditional and would disinherit him if they knew he had a child out of wedlock, Rebecca explained, her eyes occasionally drifting to Emma in the garden. I believed him for years. He'd visit regularly, provide financially, even take Emma on little outings, always careful to go where no one would recognize him. "When did you realize it wasn't going to change?" I asked. A sad smile crossed Rebecca's face. "When I saw the announcement of your engagement in the society pages. He swore to me it was a business arrangement, that he didn't love you." She looked down at her hands. "I'm ashamed to say I believed that too, for a while." "We were all believing what we wanted to believe," Patricia said softly. When Emma came inside for cookies, the tension dissolved into something gentler. She chattered about kindergarten, showed Patricia her favorite doll, and eventually climbed into her grandmother's lap as if she'd known her forever. I watched Patricia's face transform with a joy I'd never seen before. As the visit concluded, Rebecca pulled me aside while Patricia was showing Emma her collection of music boxes. "I need to apologize to you," she said, her voice low. "I knew he was dating someone else. I knew he was lying to us both. But I stayed silent because of Emma." "You don't owe me an apology," I assured her. "You were protecting your daughter." "Still," she insisted, "when I found out you were divorcing him, that he was going to prison, part of me was relieved. Not just for me, but for you too. No one deserves what he did to us." We exchanged phone numbers before they left, something I never expected but somehow felt right. As we watched their car pull away, Patricia wiped tears from her eyes. "I missed 6 years of her life," she said quietly. "But you have many more ahead," I reminded her. 2 years after the divorce, I received a letter from James in prison. I stared at the envelope for a long time before finally opening it. "Sarah, they say time gives you perspective. After 3 years here, I've had nothing but time. I won't ask for forgiveness. What I did to you, to my family, to Rebecca and Emma, it's unforgivable. But I need you to know that I understand now how deeply I hurt everyone with my selfishness and lies. My therapist says I should make amends where possible. I don't expect a response, but I wanted you to know that despite everything, you taught me what real integrity looks like. On our wedding day, when my mother humiliated you and I stood by doing nothing, your dignity in that moment haunts me. You deserved better. I hope life has given you everything I couldn't. James." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. Not because it meant anything romantic, those feelings had long since faded into nothing, but because it represented something important in my healing journey. The final acknowledgement that none of it had been my fault. 5 years after the wedding day disaster, I found myself standing in front of an audience of 300 women at a financial independence seminar. My consulting business had evolved into a full-fledged educational platform teaching women how to protect themselves financially in relationships. "The most dangerous prison isn't made of bars, but of financial dependence," I told the attendees. "Knowledge is your first defense." In the front row sat Patricia, now a regular speaker at these events, sharing her perspective as someone who had once wielded financial power without awareness of its responsibility. Beside her was Rebecca, who had recently joined our foundation's advisory board, bringing valuable insight as a single mother who had navigated complex support issues. After the event, the 3 of us went to dinner, our now monthly tradition. We had become an unlikely trio united by common experience and purpose. Emma got the lead in the school play, Rebecca shared proudly, showing us photos on her phone. At 11, Emma was growing into a confident young girl who spent regular weekends with her grandmother. "She has remarkable poise," Patricia beamed. "The drama teacher says she's a natural." "How are things with Professor Hansen?" Rebecca asked me with a sly smile. I felt my cheeks warm slightly. After years of focusing solely on rebuilding my life and career, I had recently started dating again, specifically, a kind literature professor I met at a university lecture series. Taking it very slowly, I replied. But good, really good. He passed my background check, Patricia announced proudly. Patricia, I exclaimed, while Rebecca dissolved into laughter. What? I have resources, I use them, Patricia said unapologetically, though her eyes twinkled with mischief. No more surprises in this family. Family. The word caught me by surprise. Yet somehow, against all odds, that's what we had become, a chosen family formed from the ashes of shared pain. Later that night, as I drove home, I reflected on the strange, unexpected journey that had brought me here. The wedding day humiliation that had seemed like the worst moment of my life had actually been the catalyst for everything good that followed. When life had thrown red wine on my white dress, I had simply smiled and found a path forward. Not because I was weak, but because I had an inner strength I hadn't yet recognized. Now, as I pulled into my driveway and saw Michael's car waiting, my literature professor, right on time for our date, I felt a sense of genuine peace. The betrayal had broken me open, yes, but only to reveal the diamond-hard core of resilience that had been there all along. I was not defined by what had happened to me, but by how I had chosen to rise afterward. And that, perhaps, was the most valuable lesson of all. 7 years after that fateful wedding day, I found myself in a familiar setting, a wedding reception at the Grand Plaza Hotel. But this time, I wasn't the bride. I was the maid of honor for my closest friend from college, watching her twirl in her husband's arms for their first dance. They look so happy, said a warm voice beside me. Michael, my literature professor turned fiancé of 6 months, handed me a glass of champagne. They do, I agreed, leaning slightly against his shoulder. After 3 years together, his presence still provided a sense of security I once thought I'd never find again. As we watched the celebration unfold, my thoughts drifted to how much had changed. My consulting firm had grown into a nationally recognized resource for financial literacy and protection. Last month, I'd published my first book, Wine on White, Surviving Betrayal and Finding Strength, which had spent 3 weeks on the bestseller list. Patricia had become a different person entirely. Now 71, she spent half her time traveling with Emma, showing her granddaughter the world she'd once only valued for status opportunities. The other half she dedicated to our foundation's work, becoming a fierce advocate for financial transparency in relationships. Sarah? Michael's voice brought me back to the present. Someone wants to say hello. I turned to see Rebecca approaching with Emma, now 13 and almost as tall as her mother. They had both come into town for my book signing tomorrow. This venue seems familiar, Rebecca teased gently, referencing the irony that we were celebrating in the same hotel where my own marriage had spectacularly imploded. Full circle moments, I replied with a genuine smile. Though I think we'll choose somewhere different for our wedding. I squeezed Michael's hand. Emma, now a poised teenager with her father's eyes, but none of his duplicity, hugged me warmly. I finished your book last night. It was really brave, how you told everything. Writing the book had been the hardest part of my healing journey. Deciding how much to share, how to present James, how to honor the complexity of emotions without sensationalizing the pain. In the end, I chose radical honesty, believing it might help others recognize warning signs I had missed. Is it weird that I'm proud of it? Emma asked tentatively. Not what he did, but how you all handled it. Especially Grandma. She glanced across the room where Patricia was chatting animatedly with my parents, another relationship that had flourished unexpectedly over the years. It's not weird at all, I assured her. What happened shaped all of us, but it doesn't define us. As the evening progressed, I excused myself to the ladies' room. On my way back, I noticed a side door to a small terrace and stepped out for a moment of quiet. The night air was cool and refreshing after the warmth of the reception. I thought that might be you. I turned, surprised to find Patricia joining me on the terrace. She looked elegant in a simple blue dress, a far cry from the ostentatious outfits she once favored to broadcast her wealth and status. Just needed a moment of quiet, I explained. She nodded, understanding. It's strange, isn't it? Being back here. I was just thinking that. Patricia moved to stand beside me, both of us looking out at the city lights. James is being released next month, she said quietly. Early parole for good behavior. The news wasn't entirely unexpected, but it still sent a small jolt through me. How do you feel about that? Conflicted, she sighed. He's my son. I'll always love him. But I don't know if I'll ever trust him again. Has he continued his therapy? According to his letters, yes. He seems genuinely changed. But we've believed that before. We stood in companionable silence for a moment. He asked if he could see Emma. Patricia continued. Rebecca left the decision to her. Emma wants to meet him, with conditions. I nodded. She's wise beyond her years. Like someone else I know. Patricia turned to face me fully. 7 years ago, in this very hotel, I did something unforgivable to you. Yet here we are, practically family. Life takes unexpected turns, I said simply. I've received an invitation to your book signing tomorrow, she said, changing the subject slightly. Will you be reading passages? A few. Nothing too personal about the family. Patricia waved away my concern. Read whatever you feel is important. No more secrets, no more shame. That's what we promised, remember? Inside, the music changed to something upbeat, and through the windows, I could see Michael looking around, probably wondering where I'd gone. Your young man is searching for you, Patricia noted, following my gaze. He's a good one. I didn't even need the background check to know that. I laughed. You still ran one though, didn't you? Of course, dear. Old habits. She offered her arm. Shall we go back in? I believe he might be working up the courage to dance, poor thing. As we re-entered the reception, I was struck by the beautiful irony. The woman who had once thrown wine in my face was now linking arms with me, making affectionate jokes, and had become one of my closest confidants. The next afternoon, my book signing event was packed beyond the bookstore's expectations. Rows of chairs filled quickly, with people standing along the walls and spilling into adjacent aisles. From the small podium, I could see my support network scattered throughout the audience, Michael in the front row, my parents beaming proudly from their seats, Rebecca and Emma toward the middle, and Patricia regally positioned near the back, where she could observe everything. After the store manager's introduction, I stepped up to the microphone. Thank you all for coming today. Wine on White isn't just my story, it's about the unexpected strength we find when our lives shatter in ways we never imagined. I opened the book to a marked page. I'd like to read a short passage, if I may. I took a deep breath and began. The wine dripped down my wedding dress, staining the white fabric crimson. 200 pairs of eyes watched in shocked silence as my mother-in-law's words hung in the air. She's not worthy of my son. This marriage is a mistake. In that moment, I had a choice, collapse in humiliation or stand in dignity. I chose to smile, not because I was weak, but because I somehow knew this wasn't the end of my story, but the beginning. What I couldn't have known then was that the woman who publicly humiliated me would one day become my greatest ally. That the man I thought I loved would reveal himself as a stranger. That from the ashes of that perfect white dress, stained red with cruelty and judgment, would rise a stronger version of myself I hadn't yet met. Sometimes the worst moment of your life is actually the doorway to your best self. But you can only find that door if you're willing to stand in your own truth, even when your makeup is running and your dress is ruined and everyone is staring at your humiliation. 7 years later, I understand something I wish I could tell my younger self. Your worth isn't determined by who stays or who leaves, who believes in you or who betrays you. It's determined by whether, in your darkest moment, you can still recognize the light within yourself, even if that light is just the smallest flicker of knowing who you truly are. I closed the book and looked up. The room was completely silent for a moment before erupting into applause. In the back, Patricia discreetly wiped a tear from her cheek. After signing books for over 2 hours, my hand was cramping and my cheeks hurt from smiling. The last person in line approached, a young woman clutching my book tightly. I just wanted to say thank you, she said quietly. I'm going through something similar right now. Reading your story gives me hope that there's a life waiting on the other side of this pain. As I signed her book, I added a personal note, trust your own strength. It's greater than you know. Later that evening, as Michael and I had dinner with my parents, Rebecca, Emma, and Patricia, I looked around the table at these people who had become my chosen family through the strangest of circumstances. A toast, Michael proposed, raising his glass. To Sarah, whose strength and grace continue to inspire us all. Patricia raised her wine glass with a knowing smile. To strength that comes from within, not from others' approval. As our glasses clinked, I felt a sense of completion. The journey hadn't been what I expected, but it had led exactly where I needed to go. That night, as Michael and I walked back to our hotel under a canopy of stars, he asked, "Do you ever regret it? Meeting James, the wedding, all of it?" I considered the question carefully. I regret the pain, but not the journey. Without it, I wouldn't have found my true purpose, or rebuilt myself into someone I'm actually proud to be. I squeezed his hand. And I might never have been ready for you. Sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as its biggest disasters. The wine that stained my dress had ultimately cleared my vision. The public humiliation had led to authentic confidence. The betrayal had opened the door to genuine love. And the woman who once stood trembling in a ruined wedding dress had become someone who could not only survive the worst day of her life, but transform it into the catalyst for her best life. That's the thing about true strength. It doesn't come from never falling. It comes from rising, again and again, until you finally understand that you were never actually broken in the first place. 10 years after that red wine cascaded down my white wedding dress, I found myself standing in a courthouse hallway, my heart pounding despite my outward composure. Today would be the first time I would see James face to face since his sentencing. He had been released from prison 3 years ago and had maintained a carefully supervised relationship with Emma, who was now 16 and remarkably well-adjusted despite her complicated family history. By all accounts, including Patricia's rigorous monitoring, James had genuinely changed. He had completed extensive therapy, maintained steady employment at a small accounting firm willing to give him a second chance, and had even established a support group for former financial offenders seeking redemption. "You don't have to do this," Michael reminded me, his hand steady on my lower back. After 5 years of marriage, he knew my every expression, including the slight tension around my eyes that betrayed my anxiety. "I know," I replied, "but it feels right somehow." Full circle. We were at the courthouse because James had petitioned to have certain restrictions lifted from his parole, allowing him to work with a non-profit that helped recently released prisoners reintegrate into society. The judge had requested statements from those affected by his crimes, which was why Patricia, Rebecca, and I had all agreed to appear. The courtroom doors opened, and Patricia emerged, her expression unreadable. At 74, she remained elegant and formidable, though softer around the edges than the woman who had once terrorized me. "He looks older," she said simply. "Rebecca's inside. They're ready for you." I squeezed Michael's hand before entering the courtroom alone. We had agreed this was something I needed to face on my own. The room was smaller than I expected, intimate almost. Rebecca sat in the front row, offering a supportive nod as I passed. And there, at the defendant's table, was James. Patricia was right, he looked older. The polished charm that had once seemed so integral to his personality was gone, replaced by something more authentic, if weathered. When he saw me, he straightened slightly but remained respectfully distant. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, called me forward. "Miss Carter, you were married to the petitioner and were a victim of his fraudulent activities. Would you like to make a statement regarding his request?" I approached the podium, my prepared notes suddenly seeming inadequate. Instead, I spoke from the heart. "Your Honor, 10 years ago, James Wilson broke my trust in ways that went beyond financial fraud. He created an elaborate fiction of love while living a double life. The damage he caused wasn't just monetary, it shattered my sense of reality and self-worth." I paused, making myself look directly at James, who met my gaze without flinching. "But I stand here today not as a victim seeking continued punishment, but as someone who believes in the possibility of genuine change. I've spent the last decade working with women recovering from financial and emotional abuse. I've seen that transformation is possible, but only when accountability is complete and atonement is genuine." The judge leaned forward. "And do you believe Mr. Wilson has demonstrated those qualities?" I considered the question carefully. Based on his actions over the past 3 years, his consistent presence for his daughter, his transparency with Patricia, his work with other offenders, yes, I believe he has taken meaningful steps toward redemption. "So you support lifting the restrictions on his parole?" "I do, Your Honor. Not because I've forgotten, but because I've healed. And perhaps part of complete healing is allowing others the chance to heal too." As I returned to my seat, James mouthed a silent thank you. I acknowledged it with a small nod, not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance of the new reality we both inhabited. After the hearing concluded, the judge granted the petition. I found myself alone with James for a brief moment in the courthouse corridor while the others gathered their belongings. "Your book helped me understand," he said quietly, "what I did to you, to my mother, to Rebecca. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that your words mattered. They helped me face the truth." "I'm glad," I said sincerely. "That was why I wrote it." "You seem happy," he observed, a statement rather than a question. "I am. Genuinely." A slight smile crossed his face. "You deserved that all along." Rebecca appeared then, breaking the moment. "Emma's waiting at the cafe down the street." She'd like to see everyone, if that's okay. The cafe meeting was surreal in its normalcy. James, Patricia, Rebecca, Michael, Emma and me, seated around a table discussing Emma's college applications and theater aspirations. An outsider might have mistaken us for an unusually blended but functional family, never guessing the extraordinary circumstances that had brought us together. Princeton is my first choice, Emma was saying, animated in a way that reminded me fleetingly of James in his more genuine moments. Their theater program, combined with international relations, is exactly what I want. Your essay is compelling, I offered, having helped her edit it the previous week. They'd be lucky to have you. James watched his daughter with pride untainted by the possessiveness that had characterized him before. Whatever you choose, we're behind you. Though he wasn't lost on me, how far we had all come, to sit together without tension, each playing our unique role in this young woman's life. As we prepared to leave, Emma pulled me aside. I applied for the internship at your foundation too, she confided. I didn't tell Dad yet because I wanted it to be on my own merit if I get it. The selection committee doesn't know you're connected to me, I assured her. But your application was excellent. You'll hear next week. She hugged me impulsively. Thanks for everything, Sarah. For showing me what strength really looks like. Later that evening, as Michael and I walked through the park near our home, he asked the question I'd been pondering myself. How do you feel after seeing him again? I considered carefully. Peaceful, mostly. Like closing a book I've read many times and finally putting it back on the shelf. I know the story, I've learned from it, but I don't need to keep revisiting it. No lingering anger? Surprisingly, no. That's been gone for years. What I felt today was, I don't know if there's a perfect word for it. Recognition, maybe, of who he was, who he is now, and how completely separate my life has become from his. Michael smiled, understanding as always. Closure, yes, but not the kind I once thought I needed. Not some dramatic confrontation or final vindication. Just the quiet acknowledgement that we've all moved forward, separately but somehow connected through the experience. As we rounded the corner toward home, I saw a delivery truck outside our house. The driver was unloading a large rectangular package. Miss Carter, he called. Special delivery. Needs a signature. Puzzled, I signed for the package and brought it inside. The return address was from Patricia. Inside was a painting, a stunning abstract piece in shades of red, white, and gold. A small card accompanied it. Sarah, this was commissioned for your upcoming birthday, but after today's hearing, it seemed the right moment. The artist calls it transformation. I call it wine on white. With love and gratitude for the woman who taught me that true class has nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with character. Patricia. I studied the painting, seeing how the artist had created something beautiful from the collision of colors, red bleeding into white, creating not a stain but a masterpiece of blended hues. Michael stood beside me, his arm around my waist. It's perfect for the foundation's new office, he observed. I nodded, thinking of the women who would see it there, women starting their own journeys of recovery and reinvention. They might not know its specific origin story, but perhaps they would intuitively understand its message, that sometimes when life throws its worst at you, the resulting pattern can eventually become something beautiful. 12 years after my wedding day disaster, I stood at a podium in Princeton's Grand Hall, addressing a roomful of graduates and their families. Emma sat among them, her honors cords visible even from a distance. She had indeed secured both the Princeton acceptance and the internship at my foundation, excelling at both. Resilience isn't something we're born with, I told the audience. It's something we build, decision by decision, often in our darkest moments. True strength rarely comes from circumstances going right. It comes from responding with integrity when everything goes wrong. From my vantage point, I could see my support system scattered throughout the audience, Michael beaming proudly, Patricia and Rebecca sitting together, and even James, respectfully distant but present for his daughter's achievement. The diplomas you receive today represent academic achievement, which is certainly worth celebrating, I continued. But in the years to come, you'll find that your most valuable credential isn't framed and hanging on a wall. It's the invisible reservoir of strength you build by facing challenges with courage and grace. As the ceremony concluded and families gathered to celebrate, I watched the complex web of relationships that had formed from what once seemed like irreparable damage. Patricia and my parents chatting like old friends. Rebecca introducing her new husband to colleagues. Emma moving confidently between all her various parents and step-parents, grandparents, and mentors. And me, standing firmly in a life I had built from scratch after everything crumbled. The consulting firm now employed 30 people and had helped thousands of women secure their financial independence. My second book was scheduled for release in the fall. Michael and I were discussing adoption options, ready to expand our definition of family once more. The journey from that wine-soaked wedding dress to this moment hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been therapy sessions and tearful nights, legal battles and public scrutiny, moments of doubt and days of determination. But standing here, 12 years later, I realized that the most painful moment of my life had actually been its most pivotal. Not because suffering is somehow noble, but because in choosing how to respond to it, I had discovered who I truly was, and who I could become. The red wine that once stained my dress hadn't defined me. Instead, it had revealed me, showing me a strength I never knew I possessed until it was tested. Like the painting now hanging in my foundation's lobby, what had initially seemed like destruction had ultimately become a different kind of beauty. Sometimes life's most valuable gifts come disguised as its most painful moments. And sometimes, when someone throws wine in your face and tells you you're not worthy, the most powerful response isn't shouting back or breaking down, it's simply smiling, walking away with dignity, and building a life so magnificent that it becomes its own form of justice. That's what I had done. And that, more than any revenge or vindication, was the true victory. 15 years after that fateful wedding day, I found myself once again in a beautiful white dress, though under vastly different circumstances. This time, I stood in a hospital corridor, wearing the white coat that signified my newest professional achievement, the opening of the Carter Wilson Center for Financial Trauma Recovery, the first specialized clinic in the country dedicated to treating the psychological aftermath of financial abuse and fraud. Dr. Carter, they're ready for the ribbon cutting, my assistant informed me, using the title I'd earned 3 years earlier when I completed my doctorate in psychology, specializing in trauma recovery. The journey to this moment had been unexpected. After years of working with financial abuse survivors through my foundation, I'd recognized a critical gap in mental health services. The specific trauma patterns that emerged from financial betrayal often went untreated or misunderstood. That realization had sent me back to school at 40, balancing studies with running the foundation and my personal life. The center's name had been Emma's suggestion, now a poised 21-year-old finishing her own graduate studies in social work. Carter Wilson, she had proposed during a family dinner. Because both sides of this story matter to the healing process. I had initially hesitated, but Emma's reasoning was compelling. Dad's betrayal was the wound, but your response was the healing. Both elements are necessary for the complete story. Patricia, Rebecca, and even James himself had agreed, seeing it as a powerful symbol of how something constructive could emerge from destruction. Michael, ever my steadfast partner, had simply squeezed my hand and said, "It's perfect," transformation made visible. As I approached the hospital wing entrance where donors, staff, and media were gathered, I saw them all waiting, my chosen family standing together despite the complex history. Michael, now with distinguished gray at his temples. Patricia, 80 years old but still regal in her bearing. Rebecca and her husband with their 5-year-old son. Emma, radiant with purpose. And James, standing respectfully at a distance, sober and present in a way he never was during our marriage. Before we cut this ribbon, I said to the assembled crowd, I want to share why this center means so much to me personally. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the moment. 15 years ago, I stood in a white dress very different from this one, watching red wine drip down the fabric while being publicly humiliated by someone I trusted. That moment, painful as it was, became the catalyst for everything meaningful I've built since. I gestured to the center's entrance. The people who come through these doors will be experiencing their own version of that moment, the devastating realization that someone they trusted has betrayed them financially, often destroying their security, self-worth, and sense of reality in the process. What they need isn't just financial advice or legal counsel, though those are crucial. They need specialized psychological support to rebuild their sense of safety and self in the aftermath of betrayal. Patricia stepped forward then, our planned second speaker. As someone who once wielded financial power without understanding its responsibility, she said, her voice strong despite her years, and later experienced financial betrayal firsthand, I've seen both sides of this issue. What Dr. Carter has created here isn't just a treatment center, it's a model for a new kind of healing. As the ribbon was cut and applause filled the corridor, I caught James's eye across the crowd. He gave a slight nod, acknowledgement of the journey, appreciation for the outcome, acceptance of his role in the story. I nodded back, our silent communication conveying what words no longer needed to express. The center's first year exceeded all expectations. Working in partnership with domestic violence organizations, legal aid societies, and financial institutions, we provided comprehensive support to hundreds of survivors. The research we published began changing how therapists, lawyers, and judges understood financial trauma, leading to more effective interventions and policies. On the center's first anniversary, I received an unexpected email from James. We had maintained a respectful distance over the years, communicating primarily through Emma when necessary. His message was simple. Sarah, there's something I feel compelled to share with you on this milestone day. Yesterday, I met with a man who lost everything to a financial predator very similar to who I once was. He was considering ending his life, seeing no path forward. I was able to connect with him in a way others couldn't because I understood both sides of his story, the perpetrator's mindset and the victim's devastation. After 4 hours, he agreed to enter treatment at the center. What you've built is saving lives in ways you may not even realize. The work has certainly saved mine, giving purpose to my atonement. With respect and gratitude, James. I shared the email with Michael that evening as we sat on our back porch, watching the sunset over the garden we'd planted together when we bought this house 7 years ago. He's found his own form of redemption, Michael observed. Yes, I agreed. Not erasure of the past, but meaning despite it. Does that change how you feel about everything that happened? I considered the question carefully. It doesn't change the facts or erase the pain, but it does add another dimension to the story, one I couldn't have imagined 15 years ago. Michael smiled, the same warm smile that had been my safe harbor through all the later chapters of this story. Life is rarely as simple as villain and victim, is it? No, I said, watching the golden light fade into dusk. The real story is almost always about transformation, everyone's transformation. At Emma's wedding 2 years later, I found myself in yet another unforeseen role, that of surrogate mother figure alongside Rebecca, who was officially mother of the bride. Emma had asked us both to help her prepare, creating a getting-ready suite experience that defied conventional family structures but perfectly reflected our unique bonds. Are you nervous? I asked, helping her adjust her veil. Not about marrying Tyler, she replied confidently. Just about the father-daughter dance. I understood her concern. Despite James's genuine redemption and their rebuilt relationship, certain moments still carried the weight of their complicated history. Your dad has been practicing for months, Rebecca assured her. Patricia's been coaching him. We all laughed at the image of stern Patricia drilling James on proper waltz technique. A knock at the door revealed Patricia herself, elegant in silver blue, carrying a small velvet box. A gift from all three of us, she announced, indicating herself, Rebecca, and me. Emma opened it to find a delicate bracelet with 3 small charms, a book, from me, a music note, from Rebecca, who had nurtured her love of theater, and a compass, from Patricia, who had always encouraged her to find her own direction. Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue, Patricia explained. The gold links were mine, the charms are new, the design was borrowed from Rebecca's mother's jewelry, and the sapphires are blue. It's perfect, Emma whispered, her eyes filling with tears. As we helped secure it around her wrist, I marveled at this moment, 3 women with every reason to be bitter enemies, united instead by love for this remarkable young woman and the healing journey we'd taken together. The ceremony was beautiful, the reception joyful. When the time came for the father-daughter dance, James led Emma onto the floor with visible emotion. As they moved across the dance floor, I felt Patricia's hand slip into mine. Look at us, she whispered. Who could have imagined this ending 15 years ago? Not an ending, I corrected gently. Just another chapter. Later, as I danced with Michael under twinkling lights that reminded me of our own wedding 7 years prior, a small, joyful affair on a beach at sunset, I reflected on the extraordinary arc of my life story. Happy? Michael asked, reading my thoughtful expression. Beyond anything I could have imagined, I replied honestly. Not despite what happened, but because of how it transformed me, transformed all of us. Over his shoulder, I could see the beautiful tapestry of connections that had formed from the broken threads of that long-ago day, Patricia chatting with my parents, James dancing respectfully with Rebecca, Emma and her new husband surrounded by friends from all phases of our intertwined lives. The wine that once stained my dress had long since faded, but its impact remained, not as a mark of humiliation, but as the catalyst that had revealed my true resilience and led me to this rich, complex, beautiful life. Sometimes our worst moments don't define us, they simply clear the path to who we're truly meant to become. And sometimes, a simple smile in the face of cruelty is the first step on a journey to extraordinary transformation. I had smiled that day, not knowing where the path would lead. 15 years later, that smile had become a life of authentic joy, meaningful purpose, and unexpected connections, a life more beautiful than anything I could have planned, emerging from the very moment that once seemed to shatter everything. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful truth I learned from Red Wine on a White Dress, that our defining moments aren't when everything goes right, but when we find the strength to stand with dignity when everything goes wrong.